Morning, everybody. Everybody seemed to really enjoy my desert island selections, and I had several requests and messages about my non-jazz choices. What would they be? And it's a much tougher field for me to narrow. Jazz dominates my landscape nowadays, but I've sailed through all the continents of music through my life, and to try to narrow it down to 10, 15, even 25, I found just about impossible. And so what I've done is I've picked out 60 albums that cover my life story, my narrative, my progression through music. And I certainly wouldn't take all of these to a desert island, but I would guess I would take probably 90% of these with me to a desert island. I don't want to hear no complaints about this is not a jazz episode. I'm playing jazz. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. I'm wearing a jazz t-shirt. I've done over 300 episodes on jazz. If you don't like it, you don't gotta watch it. You gotta have room to stretch out once in a while, so please hold those complaints to yourself. I think I've covered jazz as in depth as anybody on the internet the last year and a half, so I've earned the right to dabble in other parts of my record collection. What you see in here is mostly my jazz collection. There's a whole nother room with all my rock and soul and hip hop and reggae that you guys don't see very often. I've shown you little bits of it, but there's a whole nother lounge back there and a whole nother chapter of my life. I'm 48 years old as we speak, and jazz has dominated my life listening wise the last 10 years pretty hardcore. I've been DJing this whole time, which means I'm still playing soul, hip hop, reggae, funk, all that kind of classic rock. The other thing I want to discuss real quick is that when you start talking about great albums, it knocks a lot of stuff off the potential list. A lot of artists can make a great single. Making a great album is a whole different dynamic. And in that definition, it really takes most of the great music prior to 1965 and takes it out of the running when we're not talking jazz. Jazz has this ability to make a great record. Each song has value, and there's not this, that's a great song, the rest of it's crap kind of element to jazz records. When rock and roll starts coming out, it's very much driven by singles and collections and compilations, and even the days of Elvis, it's singles kind of compiled into records. So when you start looking at the great records of the 60s and soul and R&B and rock and roll, the great albums are much fewer and far between. And I honestly think that trend very much continues in rock, R&B, and definitely hip-hop. Hip-hop, more than any other genre, is dominated by singles, good catchy songs, and 90% of hip-hop records are filled with filler. Garbage production, there's very few great hip-hop records to my ears. There's some brilliant ones, but most of it's very single driven with a bunch of filler and a bunch of stuff that you don't listen to anymore. You skip over it. And so I've tried to pick 60 records here that were very important to me, part of my trajectory, that were solid records from front to back and had impacts on my life and sometimes even changed the course of my life. And I'm going to keep jazz playing because I've had most of my late videos, I haven't been able to make any money. They've been either blocking them, forcing me to edit them, or it's taking all the proceeds from them. And so I'm just going to keep jazz playing in the hopes that this won't be taken down, it won't be blocked, it won't be edited, I won't have to cut half of it out. I'm hoping we can just go through this and do it. So we're going to start now in the 80s. As I was a teenager, I was raised very much in the church by some very evangelical parents. So church, Christmas music was kind of my upbringing. My mom listened to some Hebrew. I wouldn't call it gospel, praise and worship. She had this weird record collection. Pat Boone, Mario Lanza. There might have been a Righteous Brothers record in there, maybe. There was definitely some Harry Belafonte that she got from her father, who had better musical taste than my mom. It was very limited scope. And there wasn't a lot of even radio in our home, no television in our home, music-wise. We were very limited what we could watch on television. And so music was slow in coming to me in that sense. And the first record or cassette tape I remember buying when I was probably 14 was, and I'm not super proud of this, Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. And being a preacher's kid, there wasn't much cooler than Motley Crue saying Shout at the Devil. It was fairly compelling. I would not take this to a desert island with me. It's fairly pablum baby food. It's fun. It's a little bit dangerous, but not nearly as dangerous as it once seemed. And it was just that first step, and it had this rebellion written all over it. And I always loved Motley Crue's records as a teenager. They were kind of the embodiment of the wild side that I was trying to grasp onto. So that was my first record. The second record, and it's a band I still listen to at times, is Iron Maiden. And this is Live After Death. This cassette, big long album cassette, double-length cassette, came out in '85. And boy, we were all obsessed with drawing this covers back in Canada when I lived there. The H.P. Lovecraft on the tombstone, the Eddie, everything about it, the art. And musically, it's far more advanced than the Motley Crue. It really was interesting stories. And I've always been a history guy. And so hearing the songs about the Trooper and Aces High and the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, these tracks all connected to a reality and a kind of mythology that the band has done a great job of keeping part of their narrative their entire career. So I'm a big fan of Iron Maiden. I'm not going to say I've followed them the last 20 years. I haven't. But I heard the whole band's back together as a six-piece now. And they're still packing arenas around the world. Probably less so in America than most places, to be honest. But again, they were a big part of my childhood. And I stayed really much with them until No Prayer for the Dying. And then life takes you in different directions. A few years later, 1987, I believe it is, Judas Priest Live comes out. And they were kind of the sister band to Maiden with that wave of British heavy metal. And it's actually a great record. There are versions of all their classics on here. A lot of these versions are better than the album versions to my ears. Bigger sound, better production. The bass and drums are just more in the mix than they are in those early albums. Stuff like Metal Gods, Breaking the Law, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll, Rock You All Around the World, Free We're Burning, You Got Nothing Coming, Living After Midnight. This was sing-along heavy metal. And so you get it, even there, you see how I'm migrating towards, just like in my jazz, I want melody, I want hummable, I want something I can sing along to, more so than I want abstract musicality. So this was a huge, and me and my brothers listened to this record a lot for years. And then, of course, we had Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith and British Steel. Those were all big records in my life. 1986, these guys came on my radar. And I was aware of them earlier because of Hit Parader and Circus Magazine. You saw the metal up your ass, shirts and back patches. And I knew about their logo and their name. I'd seen Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All. I hadn't got there yet, but Master Puppets came out. And I got this cassette. And I remember doing essays on this in my 10th grade English class and social studies class. And there's messages in here about war and drug and addiction and mental illness. And it's a record that was very important to me. And I would probably take the Maiden and the Priest to my island. This record, I probably wouldn't. Because it's very one-dimensional. It's a fairly flat mix. It's Cliff Burton's last with the band, so there is some bass in it compared to Injustice for All, but it's certainly not a masterpiece in the sense of where my life ends up taking me. In 1987, on a church trip to the city of Winnipeg, I stole this cassette. Back when they had the little plastic husks on them and you had to try to figure out how to get the cassette out. I stole this. I almost got busted doing it. Anthrax Among the Living in this record. And this was unknown at the point when I did that. Unknown. I think Paradise City, Welcome to the Jungle were the only two songs that had been out yet. Maybe Mr. Brownstone was about to come out. Sweet Child of Mine hasn't dropped for another 6 months yet. And this record went by pretty much unknown until Sweet Child hit. And all of a sudden everyone was talking about this new Guns N' Roses band, and me and my boys have been listening to it for a year. Knew every word. You know, and the vulgarity of it, the brevity of it, the in-your-faceness. Say what you want about Motley Crue, they weren't cursing like this. This was raw. This was very unpolished. It had a real garage rock basement production to it that as a young musician in a band, I'm like, oh, we're not that far from that sound. We're a long ways from the polished and wild side by Motley Crue, and we're nowhere near the music ability of Iron Maiden, Power Slave, but God, we can do some of these songs. You know, no, we weren't there yet, but it was more attainable. It was very raw, and I realized as I grew older how much this connected to stuff like the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith, a lot of the classic rock that exists, Queen. There's just a lot of T-Rex. A lot of those groups exist in this vein, and this was one of the great records to ever do it, and it stayed huge for a long time. 1988, this record comes out, and this was a real change of course for me, Rowland Hum. And I almost picked Joshua Tree, but Rowland Hum for me is definitely a Desert Island album, and it's a double-length album, so it's got lots of material on it, from stuff with Bob Dylan to stuff with B.B. King. They're kind of delving into the American roots, and a lot of these songs, Angela Harlan, they recorded some stuff in Memphis with the Memphis Horns, and there's just some great tracks on here. And it also has some melancholy, some All I Want Is You, Van Diemen's Land. Some of it I just really just sunk into. The versions of I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, it's better than the album version to me, with the big choir going on. Also, Bullet the Blue Sky in here is far superior to the version that's on the album. 100, 200, it had an energy and a palpable concern for world affairs. It seemed connected to a lot of sociology and a lot of humanity that was lacking in a lot of what I was hearing in heavy metal. Heavy metal is very much about sex, drugs, alcohol, party, and this suddenly had a different scope. And the film that is so accompanying it, it really was magical for me. It really kind of made my hair stand on end at times. I fell in love with it. I went backwards in Unforgettable Fire, and of course Joshua Tree was on par with this in every sense of the word. But there's a lot of songs like Bad that just still stimulate me, and this would absolutely be on my top 50 Island albums list. It's a wonderful record, and I can't really recommend it enough to people. And it really kind of opens my doors to a lot of different things. And there's a record I didn't pull, but Tesla 5-Man Acoustical Jam, where they cover a lot of classic rock in that record. Some Creedence, some Stones, and some other bands like that. 5-Man Acoustical Band, 5-Man Electric Band, they cover that Signs song, which was a big hit at the time. And so Tesla stripping down, playing acoustically, kind of opened the doors to how much classic rock was linked to 70s rock. I'm like, oh, it's very much interwoven. And so that pushes me back even further into the Aerosmiths and the sounds of the 70s. My cat is exploring. Little Butt, come here. This is Little Butt. She's my littlest of the girls we got. She's precious. She cuddles with me and naps with me all the time, but she certainly doesn't need to be up there exploring while I'm making my video. So, U2 and then that Tesla record really introduced me to a lot of different sounds. Opens my mind up to accept other things. I was very exclusive in my listening. Like, I like Iron Maiden. I don't like nothing else. I wasn't going to go and listen to The Cure because I was a metalhead. I had my hair long, so that was the whole part of the deal. So that kind of was a changing point for me. Around the same time, we moved to Minneapolis from, we were in North Dakota for a while, me, my brother, and my friend Brian. We moved to Minneapolis to be in our little metal band. There was more influences there. We started hanging around some hippies. We knew some metalheads. We knew some classic rock folks. We just knew a bunch of people. And it's about this time, too, my CD collection gets stolen. A couple hundred CDs got stolen. Our back door got axed down. They didn't take our band gear, but they took all of our CDs. And CDs were expensive back in 1991. You know, you were paying $25 for a single disc, $35 for a double CD like The Wall. So when all that stuff had been stolen, I just started to buy Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and the Stones on disc. And then when my wall got stolen, my physical graffiti got stolen, I was quite upset about it. I went to the local record store down the block. None of my stuff was there that had been stolen, of course, but a lot of it was there on vinyl at clearance prices because people were dumping their vinyl off left and right in 1991, 92. And so the Pink Floyd section was filled with 6 copies of The Wall, 6 copies of Animal, 6 copies of the Final Cut. And I was like, oh man, that's not that bad a way to go about it. And so I bought the first 5 Simon & Garfunkel records, all on vinyl, because I had that box with all their stuff on CD. I replaced them all really affordably. I'm like, this is great. And so my vinyl collection starts right there when that CD collection got stolen. And I started delving into classic rock deeper. And I'm kind of surprised I forgot Simon & Garfunkel. They should be on my list. Probably the Sounds of Silence record. But boy, Bookends. I love a lot of those records a lot. But Neil Young became the next guy I really dove into. And I related to Neil Young primarily because I love his sincerity. He's not posturing. He's not trying to be too pretty. He's never just looking for fame and fortune and wanting to be a movie star. He's just trying to exorcise some demons. And I started to recognize that in jazz when I got to jazz. This is one of his rarer records called On the Beach. And it's a kind of a bleak record. A number of his friends had OD'd on heroin at this point. He's made a record called Tonight's the Night before this. It actually comes out after it, but it was just one of the most bleak records ever made. He's wasted, just moaning the loss of his friend Bruce Berry and Danny Whitten, and he's just going through a really ugly phase. And On the Beach was a little bit more studio polished than Tonight's the Night. Tonight's the Night, I think, was actually live with some studio touching on it. This was an actual studio record. And for me, the track On the Beach is one of the great rock and roll blues songs of all time. He went to the radio interview and ended up alone on the microphone. It's just bleak. Vampire Blues. There's just a lot of songs on here I'm a big fan of. Doesn't even list the tracks on it. But On the Beach is a great record if you love Neil Young. It would definitely go with me on my trip to an island. The Grateful Dead came next, and I was living with some hippies, and they were listening to a lot of like Live Dead 69, Oxo Moxoa. They were doing a lot of LSD, which I ended up diving into pretty hardcore. The Dead really fascinated me. Terrapin Station really caught my attention. I wasn't into all of it, and I was actually less into the long jams and more into the melodic song structures that they also present. And I've become a huge lifelong Dead fan. And one of the few classic rock groups I've never abandoned or stopped listening to is the Dead. I can still put a Dead CD on a road trip, and my mind just loves the headspace that I'm in. But if you're going to be a Deadhead, you really have to go for their live stuff, because their live versions are so filled with energy and innovation and just spur of the moment ideologies. And the Dead never sound better than when with Brent Midland's in the group. And people love Pigpen, that's great. There's people who love Keith and Donna, you know, Vince Wellnick comes in the group later. But the era when Brent Midland is playing keyboards, organ, and singing, he's just the most awesome harmony to Jerry's voice. And he also gives a thickness to the vocals that Jerry's voice was very thin and weak at stages of his career. There was, you know, a lot of drugs and just abuse. And so his voice is becoming frailer, and Brent really gives it this spirituality and this gospel, powerful, higher harmonic edge that fills out both Bobby and Jerry's vocals. Without a Net is fantastic. Cassidy, Althea, Feels Like a Stranger, Mississippi Halftime, Uptown Toodaloo, China Cat Sunflower, Eyes of the World, Help on the Way, Slipknot. It's all outstanding Grateful Dead that I'm a huge fan of. And then, lo and behold, not long after this, I found this pawn shop that literally had shelves and piles and stacks of used vinyl on Lake Street in South Minneapolis. And none of it had been sorted. Most of it wasn't even priced. It was just literally, the back of the store was just shelves stacked to the ceiling of used vinyl that had been dumped on it in 1992, winter of 93. And I was excitedly diving through this as I was exploring classic rock, and all this great classic rock stuff was in there. And I went in there and I found a lot of the old Stones records, 12 by 5, December's Children. And it was on my walk home from my bus stop to my place where I was staying with those hippies. So I would stop off and grab 6-10 records and pay $15 for them. You know, it was really a great deal. and I found a number of numbered white albums with posters and photographs. And the next record I'm going to show you is, of course, the White Album. And this is a real life changer and a game changer in a lot of ways. And it's tough to pick one Beatles record, but for me, the breadth of this record is so exciting. From the beauty of Dear Prudence to Obla Di Obla Da to While My Guitar Gently Weeps to I'm So Tired to Revolution Number 9. It just encompasses so much of what's to come in music and predicts a lot of the sounds that are forthcoming. The laid back version of Helter Skelter's on here. Revolution. Helter Skelter's on here, which is the first heavy metal song. It's just a brilliant collection of songs. And while it lacks the cohesion of Sgt. Pepper's or possibly Revolver, it also predicts the next 40 years in music in so many ways and offers you so many different templates and experiences for the listener. And I can go back and just relive moment after moment, and they're all such different experiences and sonic templates that you really can't go wrong with the White Album. And it's such an eye-opener and ear-opener that it makes you realize that if it's good, it's good. It doesn't have to be a vibe or an image or part of a certain clique. If you like something, it's good. If it sounds good to you, it's good. If you like it, it's good. And it just really said, okay, I'm going to be a lot more open-minded to what I'm willing to listen to. And Pandora's box kind of springs open because of the White Album for me. And I discovered a lot of great Stones records, and for me they make the 4 greatest rock records of all time. Let It Bleed, Beggar's Banquet, Sticky Fingers, and then of course Exile on Main Street, which is probably the least commercial of the 4, but it's the most blues-filled, soul-drenched rock and roll record possibly ever made. Tracks like Soul Survivor, Sweet Virginia, Loving Cup, Tumbling Dice. It's recorded in the south of France. It feels like they're drunk and high the whole time. They were tax exiles from England living in France. And it really captures what they started with Beggars and Sticky and Let It Bleed, and takes it all to kind of one crescendo of a moment where rock fuses itself with all the blues and soul that's out there and makes this honest, ugly record. And there's stuff on Guns N' Roses that I can relate to this record. Aerosmith, I can relate to it. It really, Black Crowes. There's a lot of stuff out there that Exile on Main Street kind of gives license to. And Shine a Light. There's song after song here that is the greatest rock and roll ever made. You know, and I often say to people, the Beatles Stones discussion, the Stones are the greatest rock and roll band of all time. The Beatles are the greatest band of all time. Because the Beatles are so much more than a rock and roll band. They're a pop band. They encompass so much of the sound of popular music from all decades and sounds. The Beatles are the greatest bottleneck in history. Everything before them is in their sound, and everything since them has Beatles sound in it. The Stones, on the other hand, are much more just in that Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, blues-drenched rock and roll, ugly. We're not going to hold your hand, but we might try to pull your pants down. You know, the Stones were full of debauchery and high and talking about being high. You know, scrape that shit right off your shoes. Dead Flowers. It was just song after song of honesty and ugly and unparalleled. There's nothing quite like it. Of course, that leads me to the next great British blues ripoff band, Led Zeppelin. And again, a tough record to pick one, but again, the double album Graffiti, it's a tough album to go against. I love Down by the Seaside. I love Kashmir. I love Trampled Underfoot. There's just so many tracks in this record that I'm a big, big fan of. The Wanton song, Boogie with Stu. There's one song I'm trying to think of here. Ron Yours, great. Down by the Sea, 10 Years Gone is great. House of the Holy, Kashmir. Last Side I looked at, of course. The Rover. I love The Rover. What a great song. Page and Plant do a great job. And of course, John Paul and Bonham as well. Just embodying the blues, innovating it, and bringing it to another level sonically. The productions of Bonham's drums, their live performances are just riveting. They're absolutely one of the great bands, and of course, this is a Desert Island record, and you would end up missing not having 2 and 3 and 4 and Houses in your collection, but Graffiti is certainly going to cover a lot of your bases. And at the same time, Pink Floyd was really ascending in my listening legion of records. And I was collecting a lot. My collection started growing really fast. And to the tune of probably 500, 600, 700 records in the course of 5 years I grabbed. A lot of it from that pawn shop, a lot of it from Cheapo Records, which was selling stuff for $2 a piece. Dark Side of the Moon is one of the greatest complete albums of all time. And when you talk about albums being thematically unified, there's probably not a record anywhere in history of pop music that has a more unified front to back continuum. It's just a wonderful piece, and Roger Waters is saying some pretty bleak but honest things at the end, and it's a wonderful opus. It really is. And I contemplated picking The Wall, but The Wall is kind of an up and down affair, and there's a couple strong moments I comfortably numb. Gilmore's guitar solo is just mind-numbing, and I love the big finale. It's really climactic, but it's also kind of got an oppression to it and a heaviness to it. The whole record does. And this has more of an optimism to it, believe it or not. The one song I could do without is Money. I'm not a big fan of that one. But Time, Great Gig in the Sky, there's so many tracks on here that are just absolutely fantastic, and the way they kind of devolve into each other. It's a beautiful masterpiece and worthy of any collection. And then, of course, Jimi Hendrix kind of climbs into the mix next. And Hendrix is Hendrix. And you hear guys like Townsend talk about he made you want to put down the guitar. He's just so innovative. He's one of those guys that comes along and reinvents their instrument, like an Armstrong, like a Charlie Parker, like a Jimmy Smith. Hendrix comes along and just says, you know what, I think guitar could be a lot different than how we do it. And it's almost like he takes it from being a rhythm instrument with defined leads and breaks and starts to play it with this personality and unique bends and flares and squalls and squawks. He just fills it with personality to the point where it feels like it's talking to you. You know, Hendrix's guitar has more to say than he does most of the time. He's kind of a guy of few words, and I don't really feel his lyrics the same way I feel all of his guitar playing. And of course, the Stevie Winwood accompanied version of Ladyland on here is just magnificent. Are You Experienced, Voodoo Child, Crosstown Traffic. The Voodoo Child with Stevie Winwood's outstanding, but great stuff. Definitely worthy of any collection. And then I had another moment that was kind of a breakthrough. It was about 1996, 97. I discovered Bob Dylan. And The Times They Are Changing, the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde. There's a lot of outstanding Bob Dylan, but really these two records stand above the fray. It's All Right Now, Mom, I'm Only Bleeding, I'm Only Dying, Ballad of a Thin Man, From a Buick 6, Desolation Row, Tombstone Blues. There's so many tracks on these records that are just mind-numbingly interesting. You know, and the lyrical composition is so innovative and new and fresh. And if you listen to rock and roll 63, 64, 65, then you hear these records as they come on the scene, you realize how much impact he has. And these records still move me to this day, and to me that's essentially a double record, even though it's not. Plastic Ono Band, one of John Lennon's first solo releases. This is a powerful, ugly record. Mother, Working Class Hero, Isolation, God. It's just filled with songs. Mother, yeah, Working Class. It's just an amazing piece. Remember, Well, Well, Well. It's bleak. And like Neil Young, it has this honesty to it and unpolished pretension. It's like, I just got to say this stuff to exercise something. And so the integrity of it spoke to me in volumes. And while I'm not his best-selling or most commercial record, Plastic Ono Band is a wonderful tour de force into the sounds of honest expression. Van Morrison, his band in the Street Choir, Again, Moondance was a tough choice here, and Astral Weeks is also outstanding. But I just love the soulful nature of this little Irish guy on this record. And he does it a lot of stuff, but there's a soul narration and a American rhythm and blues take on everything he's doing. And I've Been Working, to me, is one of the great songs that kind of goes under the radar. Domino's great, Blue Money's great, If I Ever Needed Someone's great. It's powerful Van Morrison, a big part of my life, without question. And then Leonard Cohen pops up on my radar. And it's a guy whose records you see plenty. This record has been in print off and on for most of my time collecting records. And I used to see it a lot. And it was actually bands like Sisters of Mercy and Skinny Puppy and some of those industrial bands that were covering his stuff. The band Coil does Who by Fire. And it was those interesting analogies and crossovers from some of the gothic music that my roommates were into that I was kind of getting into myself. And I'm like, oh man, who's this Leonard Cohen guy? Turned out he was Canadian, which gave me an extra reason to really love him. And So Long Marianne, Sisters of Mercy, Bird on a Wire, The Partisan, Famous Blue Raincoat's one of my favorite songs ever. This collection has to come with me. I listen to his stuff all the time, and it never really gets old or feels dated to me in any way. And a true innovator, you know, with the sexual, spiritual duality of everything he says, makes Cohen a very interesting player in the music industry. And then Tom Waits, another guy who was really hard to pick on record. I went for the double record. It's really a jazzy set with jazz musicians playing in a real jazzy environment, like a little lounge. And the Nighthawk Diner Stories, Old Phantom Joe, On a Foggy Night, Emotional Weather Report, Eggs and Sausage, Better Without a Wife, Nighthawk Postcards, Warm Beer, Cold Women. It's just one of the great beatnik progenitors. He just brings that whole beatnik thing into the music thing in the 70s. And Free Blue Valentine, Foreign Affairs, all those records in the late 70s period are just really brilliant and fun and unique. But I went with Nighthawks because I'm a big fan of Nighthawks at the Diner. It's really outstanding. Steely Dan is one of the last rock and roll records I'm going to show you from that era. And this was introduced to me by my friend Justin, who was my best friend. And he's like, you should check out Steely Dan. And it wasn't the live, soul-filled sounds of the bands I loved. It wasn't driven by this integrity and this driving need to express. It was driven by production, by playing, by arrangement. And it's a very highly polished, sonically pleasing sound. And so where a lot of the other artists I love are very much into the soulful expression and emoting of my life, you don't really get that from Steely Dan records. You don't get the honest expression of my feelings, but you do get a wonderful presentation of how this music can sound as good as it can. And there's a lot of great records, Pretzel Logic, Katie Lied, but in the rock and roll production vein, it's highly, highly polished and sounds great on any system. And I'm sure most of you have that record, especially if you're jazz fans. Moving along, Dead Can Dance was a group I discovered from a roommate who I'm not really friends with anymore, but this still makes me relive my moments with him. We were good friends for a number of years. And Dead Can Dance is an Irish guy and an Australian Turkish immigrant, Lisa Gerard, and they create this interesting global world music. And I think that's the Orinoco River could be part of the Amazon. It's South America, if I remember correctly. There's nothing really to describe or to compare Dead Can Dance to. There's a lot of global percussion, interesting drums. She sings in this language that she's kind of made up, and she's just emoting. It's got this spirituality to it that you can't deny. This human consciousness, this human interconnectedness that it's kind of driving home. That we can use some African drums, some Arabian drums, some Far Eastern instruments, the zither, and put some Irish folk song on top of that and make something that's really human and worldly. And Into the Labyrinth, Serpent's Egg, they make a number of records towards within that to me are just beautiful music and beyond pop, beyond rock, undefinable. And you could have this in your collection anywhere in the world, and it would pretty much fit in. It probably fits in less in America than anywhere. Bob Marley's Kaya. And again, this is probably the toughest guy for me to pick one record by. I love the first couple records that are very powerful and militant, but I love the peace of mind he's found here by Kaya. He's really kind of taken a deep breath, and he's found this kind of soothing calm. And I challenge anyone to show me a better back-to-back-to-back track listing on her side of a record than The Sun Is Shining, Is This Love, and Satisfy My Soul. Those three songs show up in a row. Is This Love is a gorgeous ballad of unrecorded love. Sun Is Shining is one of the most uplifting, beautiful tracks that I've been playing in my sets for 20 years. And Satisfy My Soul is just this orgasm of happiness. Those three songs are all magnificent. And I'm a big fan of pretty much all his island work, with the exception of that last one that came out after he died with the Buffalo Soldier on. That record doesn't feel like a Bob Marley record to me. But Uprisings, Survival, Exodus, there's so many great Bob Marley Island albums that are worth owning and are filled with positive, uplifting messages. I remember the first time I really partied to Bob Marley. I was at my friend's house probably in 1993, 94, and someone put on Legend, the great collection, and you didn't have to even know it to kind of be singing along by the second verse. You know, all these songs were so powerful and so joyous, in spite of their conflicts and struggle. It was such an uplifting experience that I couldn't help but fall in love with it. And as I dug into his albums and went to records, little auctions and little, record stores, I'd buy them when I found them. And I gotta say, his Trojan stuff and a lot of the other stuff that's out there, it doesn't live up to the quality of the Island stuff. The Island stuff is just brilliant. So this goes back a little bit to 1990, but when this came out, maybe 91, Rick Rubin produced this. It changes the course of Red Hot Chili Peppers, kind of changes the course of alternate music to some degree. They discovered the funk, which they dabbled in before. They were doing Sly Stone covers, and they were covering funk, but they were so busy, and it was so messy. And this, Rubin said, let's really keep it clean. Let's repeat patterns. Let's loop ourselves as we play and keep a groove going. And it's such a sonically impressive record. The grooves are just outstanding. Flea and Chad Smith are laying down the hammers. I'm not the biggest Anthony Kiedis fan, to be honest. He's an okay singer. He's not a great singer. And the guitar players kind of come and go. It's Flea and Chad Smith that make this record magical. And Blue Monk and Give It Away Now and Naked in the Rain, Blood Sugar Sex Magic. It's just so filled with great songs. Suck My Kiss, Funky Monks. It's outstanding and a brilliant piece. A guy I've come to a little bit more later in life is Sting. And this record, Nothing Like the Sun, is brilliant. The song Fragile, it's enough to kind of make you tear up. And the humility of it, the beauty of it. This record is filled with track after track that's outstanding. And honestly enough, the big hit, Straight to My Heart, I think that was the big hit. No, it's not. We'll Be Together. The big hit was, it sounds very dated. That's the one song you feel like the label is kind of pressuring him. Sound like Peter Gabriel, sound like David Byrne. And so he makes this kind of record that sounds very 80s, that song. The rest of this record is just beautiful, cerebral. Boy, that They Dance Alone, Sister Moon, the version of Little Wing. I could do without Rocksteady as well. But Englishman in New York, Still My Beating Heart, History Will Teach Us Nothing, Lazarus Heart. The entire record is an amazing, amazing record by a Britishman with a lot of empathy and a lot of global considerations in his mind, kind of like Bono and U2. There was a real humanity to it that really spoke to me. Then we're going to jump into a couple soul records here. In the late 90s, I started getting into soul R&B, and soul, I think, suffers a lot from the not being a great album. Some great songs in there, but the whole record's not great. and this record is outstanding from stem to stern. Inner City Blues makes me want to holler. The title track, What's Going On, Mercy Mercy Me, were all big. I think they were all #1 hits actually on the R&B charts, and it has some crossover success. There's Marvin looking his beautiful and his best, and just a wonderful, soulful, honest expression of black tyranny and the oppression of the black ghetto. Barry Gordy thought it was going to kill his label, but Talking Book and this Stevie Wonder and this rejuvenated Motown, and it gave them a whole new level of integrity and honesty that sold really well. It was fresh, and boy, you can't really go wrong with that record. I wanted to pick Talking Book, but I felt like I'd be selling myself short because Songs in the Key of Life comes out a few years later. It's a double record. It's got a lot of great material on it, starring with Sir Duke and I Wish, and to me, As the Sun, the Earth, the Moon Revolving, to me that's one of the greatest songs ever made. And you want to hear great bass lines and great groove and great production, you can't go wrong with Songs in the Key of Life. It's absolutely a brilliant masterpiece and great from stem to stern. And then the third soul record I'm going to include is Curtis Mayfield's Superfly. And again, it's a big cliche, but it's a classic because it is one of the great records from top to bottom. Freddie's Dead, Pusher Man, Superfly, Eddie, You Should Know Better. It's just Little Child Running Wild. There's so many tracks on this that are outstanding. And I was disappointed when I got into his other albums, which have grown on me, but they don't have this perfect sound to them that you just fall into right away. And I thought they would. I thought those early Mayfield records and some of the other ones that came out after this would be just like this, and they weren't. And so there's something about this record, this soundtrack, this moment in time where Mayfield really bottles some magic and does some things that's pretty unparalleled. Snoop Dogg. For me, I'm not going to pick a lot of hip-hop, but hip-hop was a big part of my life from early mid-90s into the mid-2000s. I was into a lot of hip-hop. I was DJing a lot. And for me, if you want one record to party to, this is the flashlight George Clinton of the 90s. Gin and Juice, track after track on this. I loved pretty much every song on the record. I went through a lot of drugs and drinking and partying, and this, like, if you're gonna do some cocaine, stay up all night, drinking 40s, playing spades, you can't go better than playing this. And The Chronic is good, but The Chronic has more skits on it. The Dre record that precedes this, even though he debuted Snoop on that record, this record's a much better complete package. And from front to back, pum, 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 pum. It's a party record, you know, and I've played every song on this record at the club for a long time. And you can still drop Gin and Juice and move a room full of people. Okay, so this record came out in 1995, I believe. Maybe 96. The Fugees, the score. And this record accompanied me through a lot of my life. I played it at a lot of gigs over the years. It's where hip-hop underground meets the production of the big label. And with every genre in music, there's this moment where this new upstart sound gets discovered by the mainstream. And so the big labels adopt it, and they start putting big money behind the production. And so it sounds wonderful for about 6 months, but then it becomes so packaged and polished and predictable that it slaughters itself. And many genres have done that, from hair metal to punk rock to alternative to hip-hop. And hip-hop has this golden moment where the labels kind of discover it, and a lot of great stuff's being made. And the production on this record is outstanding. The stuff they sample, like Samandi, they're sampling a lot of great soul records. There's some really interesting messages, some Haitian connections. The title is short for Refugees, of course. It's really a great record, and songs like The Mask and the version of No Woman, No Cry is fantastic. How Many Mics, Ready or Not, Fuji Law, and of course Killing Me Softly, the great Roberta Flack song, was kind of ubiquitous. It's a song you can still play and have the entire room erupt. And I listened to that record a lot for a long time. Philadelphia Half-Life, by the great Philadelphia neo soul, new wave of hip hop sound. They're a live band that plays hip hop, and Illadelph Half-Life is a great masterpiece of 90s hip hop. Tracks like What They Do, and boy, there's just so many good songs on here. Push Up Your Lighter, Concerto of the Desperado, Panic, It Just Don't Stop. It's a really solid record, and Black Thought is one of the most intellectual MCs of this or any other era, and he deserves a lot of recognition. Nas kind of comes on the scene, and Nas and the Wu-Tang were very much everywhere in the 90s. And I think Nas has a better production value being on Columbia. This early Wu-Tang stuff is actually very raw, very unpolished. By the time they do their second big record, that polish has definitely showed up, and they're making much more polished stuff by forever. But these two records were both huge parts of my life, and I'm on the fence as whether I would take some of this hip hop to me with my island or not. It would depend on how much jazz I was allowed to bring. To me, Black Star, Mos Def and Talib Kweli, this might be the best hip hop record I've ever heard. The production's great, really nice melodic samples and grooves, and then the knowledge that Mos and Talib are spreading. It's some of the most beautiful, philosophical, honest black explanation of the experience of being black. You know, Dead Prez made a record that's pretty remarkable as well in that vein, but this is less militant than that, more palatable to white people. This is a brilliant record, and songs like Twice in a Lifetime, Respiration, Thieves in the Night, Children's Story, Redefinition. It's filled with great albums, with great tracks. Common's on a couple of the tracks, who's also one of the most important MCs of that era. And then two more records I want to show you. One more West Coast record, and I picked the greatest hits for Pac. I was never the biggest Pac fan in the 90s, I'll be honest. Even though I love West Coast, Pac, his fans were so evangelical, I think they might have turned me off somewhat. But in DJing throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, I fell in love with a lot of his stuff. And I've always liked California Love, I've always liked a few songs, Hail Mary, but there's just a lot of songs by him that have a wonderful spiritual connectivity. And if you listen to these tracks now, what sounded kind of hard and gangster in 1997, now it sounds like soul music. It's really softened and become very melodic, especially compared to what is being made today. Two of America's Most Wanted is great, Keep Your Head Up is great, Hail Mary, How Do You Want It, Hit 'Em Up, Brenda's Got a Baby, I Ain't Mad at You, I Get Around, Changes, California Love, Picture Me Rolling, Toss It Up, Dear Mama. It's just filled with great examples of black spirituality and awareness and awakening, and it really is a masterpiece, some of his stuff. And then the last hip-hop record I'm going to show you is this Outkast record. It's their third, Equipment High, from 1997-98. Came out as $9.99 triple record. It got like 4 mics from The Source, which is the big hip-hop review magazine of that time. It's brilliant. It's a great record. Dungeon Family Production's fantastic. The cover doesn't illustrate the beauty and the spirituality and the context of some of the great songs on there. It's better than it looks. And the production, like I said, is top of the mark. Just fantastic. And I'm hugely a fan. And my friend Little Butt is back once again trying to check out what we're doing. Little Butt, come here. So I'm going to wrap this up here because we're only just over halfway. I'll do the second one tomorrow. I'll give you that one tomorrow. Y'all be safe. Peace.